Hey everybody, this is Kyle, and today I'm going to be talking about some guitarists, bands, and songs that influenced me from the 90s. During the 90s, alternative music became very mainstream, famously with bands like Nirvana. For me to start talking about guitar players that influenced me, I need to go back to 1989 when I first heard Jane's Addiction. It was on MTV's Headbangers Ball that I heard. And when I heard Mountain Song and saw the band and realized, hey, this isn't metal, this isn't punk, this is something a little different than what I'd heard before, I was hooked. Guitar player Dave Navarro is a real soulful player. He's real visceral. In some ways, and people are gonna think I'm ridiculous for saying this, he reminds me of Frank Zappa because he just jumps right into what he's playing and just commits to it. And it sounds good. It wasn't until the album Ritual de la Habitual came out that I got into playing some Jane's Addiction songs. At that time in 1989 when I first heard them, I was moving, a long story about changes in life going on. And it wasn't until things started to get stable again in life, like a year or two later, that I had some time to start playing some Jane's songs. The idea of using the guitar in a different way, it wasn't something for just bone-crushing riffs or, face-melting shreddery. It was something to add texture. Big part of the 90s flannel with the alternative music was using instruments in different ways. Most famously, probably singers, Pearl Jam, Alice in Chains, Stone Temple Pilots. You have the singers that the way that they use their voice in an instrument and as a texture that gave the music a whole different feel than some genres before. Another guitar player that influenced me in the 90s, and I need to say it's one of a set of brothers. One brother was on guitar, one was on bass, and they played them in the band Stone Temple Pilots. Almost messed that up. What I got out of listening to Stone Temple Pilots is the idea of musical complexity. Growing up shredding, knowing all this information about modes and theory, Stone Temple Pilots really applied some high-level musical thinking in a very cool way. I mean, the idea of major minor chords and a song that you hear on the radio that's not like a jazz station or something like that. That was really cool to me, and it really opened up a lot of other musical possibilities. Like I mentioned, Dave Navarro, thinking of guitar and instruments in a different way, same way with the Leo brothers, adding a different musical dimension to music was really cool. To start talking about bands, I needed to give you a little history lesson. Kids, this is called a record. That's a 7-inch. That would actually spin around with a needle on it that would vibrate and would make sounds, and those sounds were music. NoFX was a band that started to get me interested in songwriting. They would have crazy stories, it was ridiculous, it was punk, it was edgy, it was sometimes offensive on purpose, but their energy, their level of musicianship, the production quality as I went through the 90s, that really taught me a lot. And again, I mentioned songwriting, having fun in a song, telling a story, which is something I do in pretty much every song I write. NoFX was a big influence on that. These other 7 inches are just for cool point cred for anybody that recognizes any of this so they can mention it in the comments. This band, Blue Meanies, is from Chicago, and they were one of my favorites back in the 90s. Of course, you can't hardly mention the 90s and influences without mentioning Nirvana. The first time I heard Smells Like Teen Spirit, and actually the first time I heard Nirvana, I had heard of them for a while. I heard that song and I was thinking, wow, that's kind of edgy to be on the radio, but I didn't think it was that good. I didn't really care about it. I was like, that's kind of cool. It sounds kind of raw. And then over the next couple months, Nirvana and so much of that Seattle sound just exploded. But from Nirvana, kind of like with the Beatles, you have some very strong melodies. You have some songwriting, and you can criticize it if you like, but you can't deny that the melodies in Nirvana songs are simple, they're strong, and they stick with you. So now I have some honorable mentions, some bands that I wanted to point out or say something about. Their amount of influence is probably lesser than anything else I had mentioned so far. Also in the comments, if there are 90s bands, music, anything 90s culture, flannel, that influenced you, or that if you were alive at the time, it's nostalgia to you, please leave it in the comments, because that stuff is very fun to talk about. You know, for me in the 90s, college, starting a career, I have a whole different take on the culture of the 90s than what you might have. So let me know in the comments what you're thinking. Weezer was another band that blew up in the 90s, and songs like Say It Ain't So. For me as a guitar player, the main part of that song is so fun to play. It's so bluesy, it's so soulful. It's a little bit Jimi Hendrix with a bunch of other stuff mixed in. The chords over the bridge is just pure jazz. When you hear it, you think it's kind of pop rock gold, but when you play it, and if you know music, then you know what I'm talking about. Another honorable mention is Cake. Fashion Nugget was a huge album. That came out right before I finished college, moving back to St. Louis, starting a career. That was an album I listened to probably daily for a couple years. And the last honorable mention I have is the Presidents of the United States of America, with songs like Kitty and Lump. They're crazy instruments, like a guitar with a bass string on it or whatever it was. And I know that that's wrong, but you get the idea. I mean, just like I mentioned before, thinking of instruments in a whole different way. Their songs were kooky, catchy, and I just loved it. And for me, my sense of humor, I just loved it. I could listen to that stuff over and over and over and over and over and over and over. So as the 90s wrapped up and I got deeper into my career, I started grad school, and my time for music lessened even more than the lesson amount as I started teaching. As I got situated with life, I actually started to produce EDM music somewhere around 98, maybe 97, but probably somewhere between 97 and 99. I started making some music kind of like Massive Attack at that time. A lot of hard trance. There was a DJ Fergie. But more on that in next month's episode, where I talk about influences from the early 2000s.
Thanks for watching. If you see something creative, like and share. Leave a comment to show you care. If you see something creative, like and share. Leave a comment to show you care. See you next time.
Flannel.